Hi, welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. But today, we're going to talk about don't be the guy who gets lost in the wood and dies. It turns out it happens more than you think.
Yeah.
We've all seen that movie Into the Wild. Do you
Mhm.
remember? Maybe it's been a little bit now. I know my older boy, that was one of his favorite movies, and it just, it's one of those things where you have good plans and you go,
Mhm.
and he's a smart guy, came up with things, and you get lost, and it just kind of all turns to crap. It's always one of those things where I think you make one mistake and then another mistake, and then things start escalating and you just start
Right.
to panic and you just start making bad decisions. Like a lot of the time, you're like a mile from safety or something and you just don't know, and you're wandering around in the woods, and things can go bad. And I guess what we wanted to talk about is it's all about preparation. It's all about really planning ahead, one, knowing your limitations. I think one of the things that's always recurring in all the stories I read were people are like, well, it would be embarrassing if I call for help, or if I have to, use my flare gun or do whatever, and they
Yeah.
have to come rescue me. Well, it's whatever. And then all of a sudden it's desperate by the time, they make the decision to call for help or whatever. Things always, you think, well, it's not that bad. And then turns out it gets that bad.
Right. Right. One mistake you can survive, but it's when that mistake leads to multiple mistakes after that. And I think um that's where a lot of people, like you said, they panic
Yeah.
and start making
And
mistakes.
so let's jump into it. So the guy, Chris Canlis, is what that movie Into the Wild was based on. It was in 1992. And, he wanted to just like go experience life, kind of prove you're a man, give yourself the confidence. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I
Mhm.
don't think like, oh, he was cocky and got himself in trouble. I don't think it was that. I think he just, you want to enjoy life and you want to kind of build confidence and know what you're made of, find your stock. And, to be honest, he had a journal, and that's what a lot of the movie and the book were based on. So we have an idea of what happened, but we don't really know, and I think some
Right.
of his thoughts were like delusional and whatever, as he's starving to death. Um,
Mhm.
but basically what he had going for him was the guy's intelligent. He's motivated. He read all kinds of survival books and whatever, but he didn't necessarily have practical knowledge, right? That's
Right. He
the
didn't
thing.
have the experience.
He didn't go do it. And when you realize like how hard it is to just forage for food, and especially in a harsh environment like Alaska or something like that, and that's the thing, he wanted, the pure wilderness experience. So what went wrong? Well, one, he didn't have backup food or a real plan. He didn't really have a map or a way to get out. But it's kind of one of those things when you're in the middle of a like snowy, icy area, as bad weather starts to come in around you, it's hard to get out, like he
Mhm.
let himself be engulfed by the environment. And so that's another thing. No satellite communication, right? He had no way to call out. He had no plan, no backup plan, I
Mhm.
guess. So,
Right.
no exit plan. And I hate to say it, he was overconfident. I mean, you could say, well, Chuck, that was pretty bold move and go out there, and he was impressive. But I mean, he died. So he obviously was overconfident in his ability to get food, right?
Mhm.
And again, maybe you're like, oh, well, we don't know. Maybe he got a severe cut and, and couldn't move or work. I would say like a broken bone or something, but I think they would have saw it when they found him. But, that kind of thing.
Right.
But you know, he went in alone, and that's hard. So I mean, I guess the thing was like there was a river, and it got because of seasonal melt, it kind of closed off his exit. So
Right.
that was one thing. Um, and even from his notes, he had misidentified certain plants. But that's one of the things. Like you watch those shows like Alone or Naked and Afraid, when people start like starving and you become malnutritioned, you see the judgment mistakes dramatically step up.
Mhm.
You always see like people cut themselves with their axe or their knife or whatever on these shows, and a lot of times they're very experienced people who I'm sure if you asked them would be like, "Yeah, in 10 years of working with knives and axes, I've never cut myself, whatever."
Right.
I mean, in a significant bad way, and
Right.
then on these shows, they have, like, major accidents,
Mhm.
and I think it's because of that malnutrition and starving, your brain really starts to shut down. People don't count on that. So that's where, like, a lot of the bad judgment things start to happen is when you're starving. So I think one of the key takeaways is make sure you have food going into things and have a backup plan for some calories. That would be a key. There was that story, 127 hours. There was a movie, Kevin. What do you know about that one?
Yeah, yeah, I know that I watched it, and I know that it, grossed me out. I never watched it a second time.
It
But
makes you
yeah,
look at
he
your Leatherman, a little
in it yeah,
differently now.
that's right. Because he had to saw through his bones, like,
Oh, oh,
he had to break his bones so that he could make the cut.
oh, that's
So,
bad, dude.
it was pretty gross, yeah. You know, those sorts of situations, I think the number one problem is when, someone's in a serious problem is they're solo hiking,
Yes.
and I've done that, and you know generally speaking it's not all that dangerous if you're in a place that you're familiar with, but bad things can happen. Just a broken leg when you're 5 miles from a road can
Yeah.
be a significant issue, if you're by yourself.
You're like, "Oh, that won't happen," or,
Hmm.
you you were telling me earlier you had a buddy who does solo hikes and adventures
Yeah,
and
and
stuff.
he does it all the time, but he was having some health issues,
Mhm.
some physical pain he was feeling, but he decided to go hiking anyway.
Smart.
And he said by the time he got to the top, he was like in such like excruciating pain he could barely move, and was able to eventually get down by himself down to the car and call for help. And he ended up in the hospital for a long. And it was non-related to the hiking. It was just he was already sick and just decided he was going to go and do it anyway.
That I feel like that's it, and you just so poor decisions can just lead you into another. Now, I know we came across another story, something about wildfires
Yeah,
that
so
end
it was
badly if you make the wrong choice.
that's right. It was 2003. Sergio Martinez was a deer hunter. He was deer hunting in Southern California, and he was in the Cleveland National Forest, and he got lost. And he decided he would
Happens.
start a signal fire to see
Mm.
if he could get some help.
I've heard of starting fires in California not always being the best move.
Not a great idea. Spent some time in Southern California in the mountains, and it's the way fire moves there is just it's seems improbable.
Right.
I grew up and lived in the Northwest, and everything's damp all the time. Like you can't. It's hard to start a regular fire and keep it going, let alone something getting out of hand. But I was up there camping, and I found a log about 4 inches thick and about 2 feet long, and I was able to light it with just a lighter, no kindling,
Yeah.
nothing. Just holding a lighter on
That
a
is a
log, and
little
it started
different.
on fire. It's like, yeah, just the way fire out works there.
That's
Without water for that long. Because they have a rainy season and a dry season, so things grow and then dry up. So he
that's
started a little signal fire, and eventually it burned 437 square miles, not
that
acres, square miles.
miles. That's significant. And
Yeah, it
that's
was
like,
called the
he was
cedar
just out
fire.
hunting, right? And
Hmm.
he was hunting and he got lost and yeah, it gets away from you. So yeah, they frown on that kind of thing. I know there was a guy later in Arizona more recently. They fined him like $300,000 for starting fires. But your cedar fire, like 15 people got killed from those fires. It was
Yeah.
significant, right?
Yeah, over 2,000 buildings burned down, most of them houses. And, caused a lot of destruction and a lot of death. And it was just one little mistake.
Uh, yeah.
He survived,
So
though, so he didn't burn himself up.
you know what always gets me is the desert. The desert is always like terrifying to me. Like it can turn so bad so quick.
Yeah.
So one of the examples, and I'm sure there's a million examples of people coming across the border and that stuff, because they're trying to avoid populated areas, they end up crossing huge parts of desert and it ends bad. One of the stories I had was the Death Valley Germans. It was a German family and they were touring Death Valley in a rental minivan in 1996. So it's a little while back. Um, they thought, hey, let's leave the paved roads. Let's go exploring, off the beaten path, Kevin,
Everyone knows that a minivan is great at
at off road.
off-roading, yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if you get your deposit back if after something like that. But so they don't have any maps, right? Like I think they have like the big state map, and that's kind of it.
Hmm.
Um, no awareness of like desert survival or something like that. Wasn't like, oh, we're outback people. So they didn't bring extra water. That I mean, you just go on a regular hike here, or in the
Hmm.
mountains in New York, you want to bring extra water.
At least
When
a
you're
half
out there,
gallon of water for
yeah,
me, if you're gonna find, if you know where a spring is, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
one
yeah,
of those, water is really one of those things that can that I think a lot of people underestimate when they go out in the woods.
yeah. No, and that's just regular anywhere. Forget the desert. And if you're in the desert, your vehicle should have water all the time,
Hmm.
just ready for because you don't know when things are going to turn bad. And also, it's nice to be able to help other people when you come across them.
Right.
So they thought, oh, if we have a problem, we'll just call for help and, somebody will come save us. But the bottom line is the minivan did get stuck, Kevin.
All
I
right.
know you thought it wouldn't, but it did. And they tried to walk. Oh, let's just leave the van, which again, sitting in a hot minivan, probably not the right answer either. Um,
Hmm.
and in the extreme heat, all four ended up dying from dehydration. But that's one of the big things. It's all that desert area we have, along our southern border in the US. There's a lot of bad things that, kind of can escalate quickly. And when you don't have money or sorry, water, it's a big deal.
Right. Right. And I think that most of the situations, not all of them, but most of the situations that I've heard about people dying in the wilderness, whether it's the forest, the mountains, the desert, it's just unprepared for the conditions, you
Right.
know?
Well,
People freeze to death, people die of dehydration. It's rare that people actually starve to death in the wilderness, but that happens. That was the situation with the guy in Alaska.
right.
Um, People just unprepared for the conditions themselves. You might spend your whole life hiking in a certain area and even not even leaving the country, just leaving in a different situation, and you're just not prepared for the
Right.
conditions of the different situations.
Absolutely. I think we see it too with like a lot of like people who go hunting and just aren't experienced.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I think that a lot of people have like these idealized views of the woods, right?
I-
You always see those white ladies that grew up watching Disney Channel, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, look, there's a bear. Let's give him some food." And I
Yeah.
don't know how somehow they seem to survive all the time, but I mean, it's
Well,
not
the
not a
Disney
good idea. they're
Yeah.
not they're not pets, you know. They're not like the cute stuff you see on TV.
Well, I think it was Baloo is the bear that they're giving the food to, and the rest of it,
Right.
or maybe Yogi. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, no, that's not quite the same. But I think like
Yogi Bear was a grizzly, and and they don't just steal picnic baskets.
baskets.
Sometimes they snatch babies. That's happened, you know.
Well, that's fun. Yeah, but in the cartoon, it was always an accident when Yogi takes a baby. They grab the basket and the baby's in there, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah,
sorry, that
real
was
grizzly bears eat those babies.
they eat the babies. No,
So I mean, all I'm saying is, you know, even a deer, you know, not something to go up and try and touch. They'll
no,
bite you, they'll fuck
they'll
you up,
kick
they'll
you.
stomp on
Yeah,
you with the yep, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. They're not, you know, all these animals that people think are cute, they're not so cute.
Kevin, Bambi is cute. All right. So one of the things, like hunters, right? In my mind, I think of like you saw all those things in like the 50s where the guy'd be like out smoking a cigarette, six pack of beer, and they go hunting and it seems to work out for them, right? They come
Yep.
back, the big deer tied to the roof of the station wagon. And that's how people are like, oh, it could be like that. I don't need flashlights, fire starting stuff, extra layers, maybe a headlamp, um,
Mm-hmm.
a map or a strong familiarity of the area that you're hunting in. They always say, "Oh, I'll be back before dark." That's how it is in your mind.
Right.
But you go just a little bit longer, the deer are moving in, or whatever. And how often do you not have phone service? Like to me, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
I was going to work and they had a detour right in town here. And so I'm like, oh, cool. I'll just put in my phone, in maps, how to get to work without being in a half hour late or whatever with this detour. And then no service. And anywhere I went, no service. And I'm like, oh, crap. And all of a sudden
Yeah.
I got to drive faster than possibly the posted speed limit. I mean, I'm just saying it's possible to get to work. I would never admit to a crime while I was in the on the internet, but I'm just saying sometimes you have to really push the limits. We'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying the limits of the Hemi. I'm saying the limits of the law. And but darkness sets in. Maybe you get you sprain your ankle. Right? Try and walk on a real sprained ankle, and I'm not talking about like a little twist and it hurts,
Right.
or not a strain or whatever. You really, or you break your ankle or something. That can
Mm-hmm.
really shut you right down.
Yeah. I
Unexpected
was
weather
doing some
shifts.
hiking.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was doing some hiking with some friends of mine, and we were doing Mount Marcy, which is a big, it's a high peak. You know, it's a bit of a rough hike. And starting out,
yeah.
it was like t-shirt weather. And by the time we got to the top, it was too cold. You know, I had a coat, I had a hat, gloves. It was still too cold. You know, um, and conditions like that can change drastically just from the base of the mountain to the top of the mountain.
Well, and that's the thing. Like you get into like all of a sudden, like heavy pouring rain and wind comes in. It can be very disorienting. And people panic. I have to get back. I should take this shortcut off the trail, or I should, you know,
Yep, I've done it. I've done
and
it.
yeah,
Turns out the trail is where it is because because
because
that's the
that's the
only
best way
real
to go.
accessible way. Right. Right.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
say,
You
"Oh,
don't want,
look it, I can. This loops around. I can cut 2 miles off of this."
yeah.
And you
Why
go
do they do that?
bushwhacking through, and then it turns out you're climbing cliffs, and you're.
Right. Yeah.
It's
That's
just
not always on the map,
mhm,
topographical, right? They
right.
sometimes that's a thing. So, but even just darkness, all of a sudden night comes in, a little quicker. It's winter time. You're out for a hike and you're like, man, I didn't realize it gets dark at 6 o'clock or, whatever it is, 5 o'clock. And, hypothermia, these kind of things, especially you don't have the water and the stuff like that. It just jumps up on you.
Yeah.
Um, so what could we do? How do we prevent this kind of thing from being that guy, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll
Being
tell
the
you
guy who's the problem.
one thing that I always do is whenever I'm hiking, I don't always carry a tent because they can be, big and cumbersome. And if you're just going for a hike, there's no need for all that sort of stuff generally. But I always carry a tarp, a tarp and a little bit of paracord because worst case situation, you can at least keep the rain off your head. You can set up a shelter and, with a little bit of rope and a tree branch, you can make a decent lean to
Yeah.
and, you know, and at least you're not getting rained on, at least you're not getting snowed on while you sleep.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So one of the other things I think that's important is like one, learn a little bit about land navigation. Learn about using the sun and turns out which direction the sun rises in and where the sun sets. All right. So now you should be able to figure out east and west and north and south. Now,
Hmm.
that doesn't do you any good if you don't know that the road is 2 miles south of where you are.
Right.
If you're like, well, the road was that way, that
Hmm.
doesn't help you when you're lost in the woods. But if you kind of have a familiarity and you lay it out, I mean, that's the thing. When I go into the woods, I'm like, all right, if I go in here, I know that I can't walk. If I walk 2 miles in any direction, I'm bound to hit a road, like, because I'm completely boxed in,
Right.
or I'm going to hit the river, or I'm going to hit the mountains, or my mountains are on the west side of me, or, I mean, you need to kind of orient yourself like that and think about what are my obstacles? How far is that? This is a minimum because everyone's like, I have my GPS, I have my phone, I can just, look it up. And that's not, you drop the phone, you lose it, it falls and cracks, you trip and fall, and it's in your pocket and it
Hmm.
breaks on the rock you land on. These things happen. It starts pouring and your phone stops working. The battery goes a lot faster because it's searching for service the whole time you're out.
Yeah.
They can't find an antenna and now the battery's down to nothing, or because you're staring at the map. I know when I do a road trip, the map just sucks down the battery. If I don't have it plugged in the car, you
Right.
don't get the same life that you get, on the day to day. You're like, oh, my phone, 24 hours, easy. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
that's if you're not using it,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And I would recommend, I do this when I go hiking. I bring my phone with me, but I
mhm,
turn it off,
uh-huh,
I turn it on when I need to do something, if I would need to check the weather, if I need to look for, maps, things like that, but I keep it off,
right.
and that when
Not a
you're,
bad
like you
play.
said, when you're searching for service, it runs that battery down fast. And if you're going to be out for a day or two in the woods, then, keep that phone off unless you're actually using it.
Right.
But I mean, the main thing I would say when it comes to these sorts of things is make sure that you're prepared with enough food, more food than you need, more water than you think you're going to need, because you never bring enough water when it's 2 days or, when it's 3 days and out in the woods. It's
Right.
not. Whatever you brought, it's not enough.
I
Um,
always think like I'm like, oh, 3 hours. I don't normally drink water in 3 hours. Why would
right.
I on a 3 hour hike need to bring water? Well,
Hmm.
turns out you do.
Right. And always have multiple ways to start a fire. So, I always bring multiple cigarette lighters, and those are great. Those little Bics, they're great. But if they fall in the water, that's it. That's,
They're done.
you have to wait for that to dry out a lot longer than you want to wait. Um, and I know that a lot of guys that listen to the podcast practice the fire starting.
Yeah.
Anyone that's done that knows that it's a nightmare to try and do it just with, like, a bow drill and rubbing
Bow
two
drills
sticks together. It
takes.
doesn't it You got to rub for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So having, like you said, some redundancy really helps. That's one of the big things. And like try starting a fire when it's wet and rainy
Hmm.
or that kind of thing. Because it can be done, but you'll find if you have like 3 or 4 matches and you've not done it before, turns out you need a lot more dry, ready to go stuff
Right.
than in a normal, conditions, right?
Mhm.
So that can definitely get away from you. But I think going and practicing in severe weather, going out when it's raining out and trying to survive the night. See how disorienting it is. And I'm not saying go put yourself in harm's way. I'm saying be in an area that you're completely familiar with and try it and see how much it sucks. See
Mhm.
how when your socks get all wet and your feet start to blister and hurt and, things get away from you. Learn to deal with what comes up, but also learn what is going to come up. That's the kind of thing is you need to figure out what bad things can happen. That's why they say, go and train and whatever. In the military, you always had the joke of train like you fight, so they'd be like, "Oh, I should be drunk because that's."
Yeah.
Um,
Right?
but that's the thing is you want the real world application, right? Like you want it how it's gonna be. And if you're gonna be spending a day walking around with night vision, turns out try spending an evening walking around with night vision and realize how it can give you headaches or, just be disorienting. Like try and drive the four-wheeler with night vision for more than 5 minutes and you'd be like, "Oh, this is really like, can get you." And maybe you're fine with it. Maybe you've practiced and you're used to it and that's okay. But I'm just saying you need to realize what things might come up and you figure that out by applying these things and going and doing. Um, that was one of the things, with Into the Wild was there wasn't enough real application on site. You think from a book you can take away everything, but you need to know these things cold so that way when your body is deprived of calories or added stress from the environment or things like that, that you're able to make those sound decisions. And so important to just stop and think. Don't do things that are rushed when you're in a desperate situation. That's when things get into trouble. Sometimes a little thinking can make so much more, better results. And
Mhm.
you'll go, by planning ahead. So, thoughts?
Yeah. No, I mean, really, it is, generally speaking, when you read these stories, it's people making one mistake and then it, avalanching into something else. So you find yourself in a bad situation. First thing is, calm down. You know what I mean? Like, don't freak out. Calm down, sit down, think about it for a few minutes before you even, start moving. Um, Generally speaking, they say stay in place if you're in the wilderness. I've been in places where that if I stayed in place,
You'd
nobody
be
was
dead.
ever going to find
Yeah.
me.
And that's
And I'm not
absolutely
saying I was in a bad situation. I'm just saying that, you know, there wasn't anything, and nobody was going to come across me accidentally where I was at.
right. And that's the thing. Like, if you're on a hike and you're not expected to report in or your final destination for like 10 days,
Hmm.
and on day one, you have a big problem, unless you can camp out there for 10 days,
Yeah.
you need to figure out a way to self evacuate,
Hmm.
to
Yeah. And
find
I
a
know
way.
that there's, a lot of survival kits. I always make fun of it. A lot of survival kits come with those rape whistles,
Yes.
the the panic whistle, but they're very light, they're very small, and they can come in helpful because just screaming at the top of your lungs, that's only gonna you're only gonna be able to do that for an hour or so, and then you're gonna be completely hoarse.
Right.
Um, so things like that you can signal with, small smoky fire, rape whistle. I think they call it a bear whistle, whatever. But um, you know, and just having a familiarity with the area you're in. And I don't mean that you've every place you go, you have to have been there before. But what I mean is look at a map before you go there, you
Right.
know? study the area that you're going to be in. Find
Right.
one of those topographical maps, because you won't end up like me and trying to climb a cliff so you can save, cut a mile off your hike and end up breaking your damn
Right.
neck.
Don't get lost in the woods because you believe the story in your head. Instead, make it the reality, right? Like,
Hmm.
focus on what's happening around you and what really matters. Um, that's really the gist of it. The woods don't kill you fast. It's the mistakes that stack up. See, I got a bunch of
Right.
slogans in there at the end. You like that?
Yeah. I think no, but I think ultimately, you you have the option to check the weather. Check the weather
Yeah.
before you go. You have the option to bring the stuff that you need without overloading yourself. Go through your pack before you leave. A lot of this is preparation, and not preparing properly ends you up in situations, right? Not failing to prepare, right?
Oh, planning to fail the
Yeah.
plan, something.
So so kind of wrapping it up on my end, you know, you got to prep for these things. A lot of this stuff is you know easy situations. A lot of these people that were in desperate situations thought it was going to be a small little trip, small hike. We're just going out to Death Valley. I mean, we've got a car. It's got AC. You know what I mean? We'll
Right.
just
The car
we're going to be
works. I
fine.
can just
You
drive
don't
back to town
need
when it
water,
goes back.
right? You know, there's I can just cross over the river and get back to civilization if I get in a problem, and then, like you said, snow melt, and that stream is a river now, right?
Right.
A lot of these things are minor missteps that lead to catastrophe.
Right. And that's it. And then you slip on the rock, you hit your head, you're falling in the water. Now you're freezing cold. And with your head bleeding, it's hard to put together a fire because you can't concentrate. And it just, things stack up. So tell people where you're going, have a plan. Solo hiking is dangerous. It is, can escalate, but these are also things that we can mitigate and try and have a plan by, redundancy and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
there's
if you've
nothing
never
wrong.
gone solo
Yeah,
hiking, I highly recommend it.
there you go. But that's the thing is, like, it's okay. Don't be afraid to live, right? And
Hmm.
enjoy life. Like, you want to be the guy who drives race cars and goes fast. That's okay. Just put some time in. Don't just say, "Hey, I've been drinking. I'm feeling pretty good. Let's go hit, see how fast my car can go and know what it's like to be a race car driver."
Hmm.
You plan a little bit. You get some steps and you build up to it. It's okay to live life to the fullest. I'm just saying take some precautions to get you there. But that's what I got.
All
So
right.
anyway, you have thoughts, concerns, a favorite story you want to hear about, somebody who got lost in the woods and made the craziness, made it a reality. Let us know. We'd love to hear about it in the comments. You have things you want to hear about or, know about, email us at preppingbadass@gmail.com. Otherwise, I would say stay safe and we'll talk to you guys next week.